The grand halls of the galactic court on Lumara were alive with the chatter of dignitaries, their towering forms casting long shadows under the crystalline chandeliers. Here, decisions that shaped galaxies were made, but amidst the throng of powerful beings, Princess Tinara of the Yorlings felt like a ghost. At barely a meter tall, her tiny frame was often dismissed or ignored entirely by the court's members. To many, she was a curiosity, a relic of a species deemed inconsequential in the grander galactic tapestry. Tinara walked with her head high, her intricate robes shimmering with the hues of her planet's twin moons. Yet her heart sank with every dismissive glance and condescending remark. Why even bother attending? She overheard a Varnokian delegate scoff. The Yorlings haven't mattered in centuries. She bit her lip, determined to maintain her composure. Tinara had spent her entire life fighting to prove herself. Born into a culture that valued physical dominance and strength, her diminutive size had marked her as an anomaly, unworthy of the throne she had inherited. The Galactic Court wasn't just another venue where she was disregarded. It was a reminder of her lifelong struggle to be seen. In the corner of the chamber, a tall figure clad in military fatigues stood at attention. Captain Eli Jameson, a human soldier assigned as part of Earth's diplomatic security team, scanned the room with a soldier's vigilance. This wasn't his first assignment to Lumara, but the pomp and grandeur of the court never ceased to feel alien to him. As his gaze roamed the crowd, it landed on Tinara, who was carefully adjusting her position to avoid being trampled by a group of oblivious delegates. Something about her struck him, her quiet dignity in the face of overwhelming indifference. While others towered over her, ignoring her entirely, she seemed to hold her ground with a regal resilience. "Who is that?" Eli asked one of his colleagues, nodding toward Tinara. "Her? That's Princess Tinara," the man replied with a smirk. "A princess in name only. No one takes her seriously." Eli frowned, his curiosity piqued. A princess in name only? He wasn't convinced. As the session adjourned, Tinara slipped away to the balcony, seeking refuge from the sea of disdain. The city of Lumara sprawled below her, its golden spires gleaming under the light of the system's suns. Alone in the vastness, she allowed herself a rare moment of vulnerability, her shoulders sagging under the weight of years of rejection. "You always seem to find the loneliest spots," a voice said behind her. Startled, Tinara turned to see a tall human man standing in the doorway. His uniform bore the insignia of Earth's coalition forces, and his rugged features were softened by a warm smile. "I didn't mean to intrude," he added quickly. "Just thought you might like some company." Tinara hesitated, her instincts warning her against trusting a stranger. Yet something in his demeanor felt genuine. "Captain Eli Jameson," he said, stepping onto the balcony. "And you're Princess Tinara. I hope I got that right." She raised an eyebrow. "Most don't bother to learn my name." "Well, I'm not most," Eli said with a shrug. "And besides, I've seen how you handle yourself in there. Impressive, given the circumstances." Tinara's lips quirked into a faint smile. "Impressive? I'm not sure anyone else would agree." "Then they're blind," Eli replied. "You carry yourself like someone who knows she belongs, even when the world tries to say otherwise. That's no small feat." Her smile grew, though she quickly masked it. "And what brings a human soldier to Lumara's court?" "Guard duty," Eli said with a chuckle. "Not exactly glamorous, but it gives me a front-row seat to all the drama. And occasionally I get to meet someone interesting." "Interesting?" Tinara echoed, tilting her head. "You find me interesting?" Eli met her gaze, his expression earnest. "More than interesting, Princess. You stand out, and I mean that in the best way." For the first time in what felt like years, Tinara felt seen, not as a curiosity, but as a person. And though she barely knew him, Eli's words sparked a warmth in her heart that she hadn't realized she was missing. Over the next few days, Eli made a habit of seeking out Tinara during breaks in the court's proceedings. Whether it was sharing a quiet conversation on the balcony or exchanging jokes in the less crowded corners of the hall, the two formed an easy camaraderie. For Tinara, Eli was a breath of fresh air, a rare soul who treated her as an equal, unbothered by her size or the dismissive opinions of others. One afternoon, during a particularly tedious debate in the council chambers, Eli caught her eye and made a dramatic face of boredom. Tinara stifled a laugh, her hand flying to her mouth to hide her reaction. When the session ended, she found him waiting for her outside. "You seemed like you needed a rescue in there," he said, grinning. "Rescue or distraction?" she teased, her tone lighter than usual. "Maybe a bit of both," Eli replied, his eyes twinkling. "Care to walk? I know a place where the court gossip can't reach us." Tinara hesitated, glancing at the bustling crowd of delegates. But when Eli offered his arm, she accepted, allowing herself to follow him through the palace's maze-like corridors. He led her to a small garden tucked away behind the main hall. The air was cooler here, the sound of trickling water from a fountain providing a soothing backdrop. They sat on a low bench, the tension of the day melting away. "This place is beautiful," Tinara said softly, her fingers trailing over a delicate flower. "So are you," Eli said without thinking. Tinara froze, her gaze snapping to his. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Then, to his relief, she smiled, shy but genuine. "You're bold for a human," she said, her voice teasing but warm. Eli shrugged. "I call it like I see it." Their conversation shifted to lighter topics, but the spark between them lingered. For Tinara, Eli's kindness felt like the sun breaking through years of stormy skies. And for Eli, Tinara was a revelation. A reminder that strength came in many forms, and that beauty was not bound by size or convention. As they parted ways that evening, Tinara found herself looking forward to their next meeting, her heart lighter than it had been in years. And though neither of them could see it yet, their connection was already beginning to change not just their lives, but the course of the galaxy itself. The court buzzed with its usual chaos, debates, alliances, and rivalries filling the grand hall with tension. Yet, amidst the cacophony, Princess Tinara found herself searching the crowd for a familiar figure. Though she often stood unnoticed in the shadow of towering diplomats, Captain Eli Jameson always managed to find her, his warm smile cutting through the alienating grandeur of the galactic court. Tinara's gaze found Eli standing near the entrance, his military uniform crisp and his posture relaxed yet alert. He caught her eye and grinned, motioning subtly toward the side exit. The message was clear: "Let's get out of here." Excusing herself from a dull conversation, Tinara slipped away, her small frame weaving effortlessly through the crowd. Outside the hall, Eli waited, his hands resting casually on his belt. "Couldn't handle the excitement in there?" he teased. Tinara crossed her arms, a playful smirk on her face. "And missed the riveting debate on interplanetary tariff codes? Never." Eli chuckled, offering her his arm. "Come on. I found something I think you'll like." Curiosity piqued, Tinara followed as Eli led her through the palace corridors and out onto a hidden balcony overlooking the city. The view was breathtaking, the golden spires of Lumara glowing under the light of the twin suns. Far below, bustling streets teemed with life, a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere of the court. "This is my favorite spot," Eli said, leaning against the railing. "It's quiet, away from all the posturing and politics." Tinara joined him, her gaze sweeping over the city. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "I never knew this was here." "Most people don't bother looking," Eli replied, his tone thoughtful. "They're too busy trying to outdo each other to notice what's right in front of them." Tinara glanced at him, her expression pensive. "You're different, Eli. You see things others overlook, including me." Eli turned to her, his eyes warm. "That's because you're worth seeing, Tinara. And not just as a princess or a diplomat, but as you." Her breath hitched at his words, the sincerity in his voice striking a chord deep within her. For so long she had been overlooked and underestimated, reduced to her size and dismissed as inconsequential. Yet here was someone who saw her for who she truly was, intelligent, capable, and kind. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice tinged with emotion. "You don't know how much that means to me." Eli smiled, his gaze steady. "I think I do." Over the next several weeks, their friendship deepened. Eli became Tinara's confidant, someone she could trust with her frustrations and fears. In turn, she shared her dreams and ambitions, her desire to prove herself not just to her people, but to the galaxy at large. One evening, as they strolled through the palace gardens, Tinara paused by a fountain, the moonlight casting a silvery glow over her delicate features. "Do you ever feel like you don't belong?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Eli stopped beside her, his expression thoughtful. "All the time," he admitted. But I've learned that belonging isn't about fitting into a place. It's about finding people who make you feel like you're enough, just as you are. Tinara looked up at him, her silver eyes glistening. You make me feel that way, Eli. His chest tightened at her words, the weight of their meaning settling over him. Without thinking, he reached out, his hand brushing hers. And you make me believe in things I didn't think were possible. For a moment, they stood in silence, the air between them charged with unspoken emotion. Though neither said it aloud, they both knew their bond was evolving into something deeper. Something neither of them had anticipated, but neither could deny. The first whispers of scandal began as murmurs in the court, rumors of the human soldier and the tiny yearling princess spending far too much time together. The sight of them walking side by side, laughing and talking, became a topic of hushed conversation among the dignitaries. Have you heard? One delegate whispered to another. The human captain and the yearling princess? Can you imagine? It's absurd, another scoffed. She's barely the size of his arm. What could he possibly see in her? The gossip reached a crescendo when a photograph of Eli and Tinara dancing at a private reception surfaced. Though the event had been small and informal, the image of Tinara hovering at Eli's level with the help of her anti-grav belt, her hand resting delicately in his, spread like wildfire. For many, it was a moment of endearing vulnerability. For others, it was a scandal of galactic proportions. In the palace, Tinara paced nervously in her chambers, the weight of the court's judgment pressing heavily on her. They're mocking us, she said, her voice filled with frustration. Mocking me. Eli, seated on the edge of her desk, watched her with calm resolve. Let them talk, he said. You know the truth. That's all that matters. Tinara stopped, her fists clenched. But it's not just about me anymore, Eli. Your reputation is at stake too. Ellie stood, crossing the room to stand before her. Tinara, listen to me. I don't care what they say. What I care about is you. You've spent your whole life letting their opinions dictate your worth. Don't let them win now. Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away, nodding. You're right, she said, her voice steadying. I won't let them define me. Not anymore. That night, Tinara attended a formal gathering at the court, her head held high despite the whispers that followed her. Eli, ever her steadfast ally, stood by her side, his presence a silent declaration of his support. When the evening speeches concluded, Tinara stepped forward, addressing the court with a voice that carried both strength and grace. I know what you think of me, she began, her silver eyes sweeping over the assembly. That I am too small, too weak, too insignificant to matter. But size does not define strength, and your judgment does not define me. She paused, letting her words sink in. I will not apologize for being who I am, and I will not apologize for the company I keep. Captain Jameson has shown me what true courage looks like, and I am proud to call him my ally and my friend. The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Though many still harbored their prejudices, a flicker of respect began to take root in the hearts of some. As the gathering dispersed, Eli approached Tinara, his expression filled with admiration. That was incredible, he said. You didn't just stand up to them, you inspired them. Tinara smiled, her confidence rekindled. I couldn't have done it without you, Eli. Together they left the hall, their bond stronger than ever. Though challenges lay ahead, they faced them side by side, ready to prove to the galaxy that love, friendship, and strength transcended size, species, and prejudice. The fallout from Princess Tinara's speech reverberated across the galaxy, sparking debates and challenges that neither she nor Captain Eli Jameson had anticipated. In the grand halls of the Galactic Court, her bold words became a rallying cry for those who championed equality and individuality. But for others, her defiance was an affront to deeply entrenched traditions. The galactic news networks plastered her image across every screen, alongside headlines such as "The Tiny Princess Who Stood Tall" and "Human Soldier's Scandalous Alliance with a Yearling Royal." Commentators speculated endlessly about their relationship, painting it as everything from a political ploy to a forbidden romance. You're the most talked-about person in the galaxy, Eli said one morning, scrolling through the news feeds. His tone was light, but his expression betrayed concern. And not all of it is kind. Tinara sat across from him, her delicate hands folded in her lap. Though her stature was small, her presence filled the room. "Let them talk," she said, echoing his words from before. "If this forces them to confront their biases, then so be it." Eli smiled, pride evident in his gaze. "You're braver than anyone I've ever met, Tinara." But not everyone admired her courage. In the shadows of the court, opposition brewed. Councillor Varon, a staunch traditionalist and a bitter critic of the Yorlings, viewed Tinara's actions as a threat to the established order. To him, the idea of a human soldier aligning himself with a tiny, inconsequential princess was an affront to the natural hierarchy of the galaxy. "This alliance cannot stand," Varon growled during a private meeting with his supporters. "It undermines everything we've built. If the princess wants to play leader, we'll show her just how dangerous the game can be." Meanwhile, Eli and Tinara continued to navigate the rising tide of scrutiny and pressure. Their quiet moments together became a sanctuary from the chaos. One evening, as they walked through the palace gardens, Tinara spoke of her fears. "Eli, do you ever wonder if this is all too much?" she asked, her voice tinged with vulnerability. "If I'm reaching for something beyond my grasp?" Eli stopped and turned to face her, his expression serious. "Tinara, you're not reaching, you're leading. You've already shown the galaxy what you're capable of, and if anyone tries to stop you, they'll have to go through me first." Her heart swelled at his words, a mixture of gratitude and something deeper. "I don't know how I'd do this without you," she admitted softly. "You won't have to," he replied, his voice steady. "I'm not going anywhere." The fragile peace shattered one fateful evening during a diplomatic gala hosted in Tinara's honor. Delegates from across the galaxy gathered in the grand ballroom, their faces a mix of curiosity and skepticism. The air buzzed with whispered conversations, the tension palpable. Tinara entered the room with Eli by her side, her regal robes shimmering under the crystal chandeliers. Despite the stares and murmurs, she held her head high, her confidence unwavering. As the evening progressed, Tinara mingled with the guests, answering questions with poise and grace. Eli remained close, his sharp eyes scanning the crowd for any sign of trouble. His instincts, owned by years of military service, kept him on edge. It wasn't long before those instincts proved correct. From a shadowed corner of the room, a figure emerged, their movements deliberate. Clad in a cloak that concealed their identity, they raised a concealed weapon, a compact plasma pistol aimed directly at Tinara. "Eli!" Tinara gasped, her eyes widening in alarm. Without hesitation, Eli stepped in front of her, drawing his own weapon in one fluid motion. The plasma bolt fired, narrowly missing him as he tackled Tinara to the ground, shielding her with his body. The room erupted into chaos. Guests screamed and scattered as guards rushed to secure the area. Eli rolled to his feet, his weapon trained on the assailant, who was already making a hasty retreat. "Stay here," he told Tinara, his voice firm. "I'll handle this." "But," she began, her protest cut off by his determined glare. "Please, Tinara," he said softly. "Trust me." Reluctantly, she nodded, her heart pounding as she watched him pursue the attacker. Eli moved through the panicked crowd with practiced precision, his focus unshakable. He followed the assailant through the palace corridors, the sound of their footsteps echoing off the marble walls. The chase led them to an isolated wing, where the attacker turned and fired another shot. Eli dove behind a pillar, the plasma bolt scorching the air. "You're not getting away," he called out, his voice cold and steady. The assailant laughed, a harsh, distorted sound. "You can't protect her forever, human. She's a threat to everything we stand for." "She's a threat to your ignorance," Eli shot back, stepping into the open. With a calculated shot, he disarmed the attacker, sending their weapon clattering to the floor. Before the assailant could react, Eli closed the distance, pinning them against the wall. He tore off their hood, revealing a familiar face, Councillor Varon. Eli's eyes narrowed. "I should have known." Varon sneered, his defiance unbroken. "You're a fool if you think this changes anything. The galaxy will never accept her, or you." Eli's jaw tightened, but he didn't rise to the bait. "That's where you're wrong. People like you are the past. Tinara is the future." Guards arrived moments later, taking Varon into custody. Eli returned to the ballroom, where Tinara waited anxiously. Relief washed over her as she saw him, unharmed and resolute. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I'm fine," he assured her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. But we need to talk about security. Tinara managed a weak smile. You're already doing more than enough. Eli shook his head. Not when your life's at stake. As the evening wound down, the events of the night left a lasting impression on everyone present. Tinara's composure and Eli's bravery became the talk of the galaxy, their bond a symbol of defiance against prejudice and fear. Together they stood as a testament to the power of courage and love, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The fallout from the assassination attempt on Princess Tinara rippled across the galaxy. The attempted assassination by Counselor Varan, once a staunch figure of galactic tradition, became the breaking point for those clinging to old prejudices. The headlines were brutal. Royal betrayal, Counselor Varan exposed, and a tiny princess stands against an empire of hatred. In the aftermath, Captain Eli Jameson stood as both Tinara's protector and her strongest ally. The Galactic Court was forced to confront the dangerous undercurrent of bias that had allowed such an attack to be plotted in the first place. Tinara, meanwhile, was determined to use the moment to make a difference. Tinara stood in the grand chamber of the court, her small frame dwarfed by the towering delegates. Despite the physical disparity, her voice carried with the force of a storm. Eli watched from a nearby seat, his expression one of admiration and pride. Counselor Varan's actions, Tinara began, her silver eyes sweeping the room, are a symptom of a far deeper illness within our galaxy. For too long, we have allowed prejudice to dictate worth. For too long, strength has been equated with size, with power, with physical dominance. But tonight, I stand before you as proof that strength comes in many forms. Her words were met with murmurs, some supportive, others skeptical. Tinara pressed on. I will not be silenced by fear, nor will I allow the actions of a coward to undermine the ideals of unity and equality. Our galaxy deserves better. We deserve better. The murmurs swelled, this time leaning toward approval. Tinara took a step back, her hands trembling slightly. Eli, sensing her exhaustion, was at her side in moments. You were incredible, he whispered, helping her from the podium. I'm not sure they believe me, she replied, her voice tinged with doubt. They will, Eli assured her. You're showing them what they've refused to see for centuries. Change takes time, but you're starting it. That evening, in the quiet sanctuary of her chambers, Tinara allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. Seated beside her, Eli watched as she stared out at the city lights, her expression thoughtful. Do you ever wish you hadn't gotten involved with me? She asked suddenly, her voice soft. Eli frowned, taken aback. What kind of question is that? I mean it, Tinara insisted, turning to face him. Your life was simpler before I came into it. Now you're a target too, because of me. Eli reached out, taking her small hands in his. Tinara, my life wasn't simpler, it was smaller. You've opened my eyes to a galaxy I never really saw before. You've shown me what it means to fight for something bigger than myself. I wouldn't trade that for anything. Tears welled in Tinara's eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. You always know exactly what to say, don't you? Not always, Eli admitted, a small smile tugging at his lips. But when it comes to you, the truth comes easy. For a moment, they sat in silence, the bond between them stronger than ever. Despite the challenges ahead, they found solace in each other, their connection unshakable. The next step in Tinara's journey was the Summit of Lumara, a gathering of the most influential leaders from across the galaxy. The summit, held once a decade, was a platform for addressing the galaxy's most pressing issues. This year, the topic of equality had taken center stage, thanks in no small part to Tinara's growing influence. The summit hall was an architectural marvel, its domed ceiling adorned with constellations that shifted and glowed like a living sky. Delegates filled the room, their presence a testament to the weight of the occasion. At the heart of the hall stood a circular platform where speakers addressed the assembly. Tinara stood at the edge of the platform, her heart pounding. Eli was beside her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. You've got this, he said, his voice steady. Just speak from the heart. She nodded, taking a deep breath before stepping onto the platform. As she walked to the center, the room fell silent, all eyes fixed on the tiny figure, standing alone in the spotlight. My fellow leaders, she began, her voice clear and firm. I stand before you not as a princess, but as a citizen of this galaxy. A galaxy that has, for far too long, allowed fear and prejudice to divide us. She paused, letting her words settle. I know what it means to be underestimated, to be dismissed, to be told that I am less because of how I look. But I also know that worth is not defined by size or strength. It is defined by courage, by compassion, and by the willingness to fight for what is right. The room remained silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Tinara pressed on. We cannot call ourselves a united galaxy while harboring division in our hearts. It is time to let go of the prejudices that have held us back. It is time to build a future where every voice, no matter how small, is heard. Her final words echoed through the hall, met first with a stunned silence, then with a wave of applause. Delegates from across the galaxy stood, their clapping a rare show of unanimous support. As Tinara stepped off the platform, her legs trembling from the adrenaline, Eli was there to catch her. You were amazing, he said, his voice filled with pride. I think they listened, she whispered, her eyes shining with hope. They did, Eli assured her. You're changing the galaxy, Tinara, one word at a time. That night, as they stood together on the summit's observation deck, Tinara looked out at the stars, her heart lighter than it had been in years. Do you think we'll ever truly change things? She asked. Eli wrapped an arm around her shoulders, his gaze fixed on the same stars. We already have. The rest of the galaxy just needs to catch up. Tinara smiled, leaning into him. For the first time, she felt not just hopeful, but certain that their fight for a better future was one they could win. Together. The weeks following the summit of Lumara were a whirlwind for Princess Tinara and Captain Eli Jameson. The seismic impact of her speech rippled across the galaxy, sparking discussions and debates on every inhabited world. For the first time, the issues of equality and representation were not just side notes, they were front and center in the galactic consciousness. Despite the overwhelming response, not all reactions were positive. Resistance brewed in pockets of the galaxy, particularly among traditionalist factions who viewed Tinara's message as a threat to the established order. These groups, emboldened by fear and prejudice, began spreading propaganda to discredit her. She was called a diminutive usurper and accused of manipulating Eli to advance her agenda. But for every critic, there were a dozen supporters. Ordinary citizens began to see Tinara as a symbol of resilience, proof that strength wasn't confined to size or physical might. The term the Tiny Titan began trending across galactic networks, a nickname that Tinara initially dismissed but eventually embraced with quiet pride. One evening, as Tinara and Eli walked through the palace gardens, the gravity of their situation weighed heavily on them. The stars above Lumara sparkled like diamonds, but Tinara's gaze was distant. Do you ever feel like this fight will never end? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Eli stopped, turning to face her. Fights like this don't have quick endings, he said. But they do have victories, and we've already won so many. Tinara looked up at him, her silver eyes filled with uncertainty. But at what cost? Your name is being dragged through the mud because of me. You've sacrificed so much. Stop, Eli interrupted gently, placing his hands on her shoulders. None of this is because of you, Tinara. I chose to stand with you because I believe in you. In us. And if that means I lose a little sleep or take some hits to my reputation, so be it. Her lips trembled, but she managed a small smile. You always know how to pull me back, don't you? That's my job, Eli said with a grin. And I'm not going anywhere. The next morning, the palace received an unexpected visitor. Grand Chancellor Yevath, the leader of the Galactic Court. A towering figure with a booming voice, Yevath had long been a symbol of tradition and order. His arrival sent shockwaves through the palace, and his request for a private audience with Tinara raised even more eyebrows. In the throne room, Tinara stood before Yevath, her heart pounding. Eli was by her side, his presence a steadying force. Princess Tinara, Yevath began, his voice measured. Your speech at the summit has stirred the galaxy in ways we have not seen in centuries. Some applaud your courage, others are less kind. I'm aware of the controversy, Chancellor, Tinara replied, her voice steady, but I will not apologize for standing up for what I believe in. Yevath studied her for a long moment before nodding. Good. Apologies are for those who regret their actions. And while I cannot say I agree with all of your methods, I cannot deny the truth in your words. Tinara blinked, caught off guard. You support me? I support progress, Eva said firmly. And it seems you have become its face. The Galactic Court cannot ignore this movement any longer. I am here to propose an official vote on the matter of galactic equality, a measure that would enshrine the rights of all species, regardless of size, strength, or origin. The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling over them. Tinara's heart raced. This was the opportunity she had fought for, but it came with immense pressure. You believe the court will agree to this? She asked. Not unanimously, Yvath admitted, but you've already swayed many. With your voice and Captain Jameson's actions as proof of what unity can achieve, I believe the vote will pass. The day of the vote arrived, and the Galactic Court was packed to capacity. Delegates from every corner of the galaxy filled the chamber, their expressions ranging from skeptical to hopeful. The tension was palpable. Tinara stood at the center of the room, her small figure illuminated by a spotlight. Eli watched from the sidelines, his heart swelling with pride as she prepared to address the assembly. My fellow leaders, Tinara began, her voice carrying over the hushed crowd. Today, we stand at a crossroads. For centuries, we have allowed our differences to divide us, to dictate who is worthy and who is not. But the events of these past weeks have shown us that unity is not just an ideal, it is a necessity. She paused, her gaze sweeping the room. I am not here to ask for your pity or your indulgence. I am here to demand what every being in this galaxy deserves: respect, equality, and the chance to contribute to a better future. Let us prove that we are more than our biases. Let us show the galaxy what true strength looks like. Her speech was met with a standing ovation from a majority of the delegates, though a handful remained seated, their expressions grim. Tinara stepped back, her hands trembling as the vote began. One by one, the delegates cast their votes, their decisions displayed on a massive holographic screen. Tinara and Eli watched with bated breath as the tally climbed, the outcome uncertain until the very last vote. When the final result appeared, yes, 62%, no, 38%, the chamber erupted into cheers. The measure had passed. Tinara's breath hitched and she turned to Eli, her silver eyes wide with disbelief. We did it, she whispered. You did it, Eli corrected, pulling her into a hug. You changed the galaxy, Tinara. The celebrations that followed were nothing short of historic. Delegates from across the galaxy approached Tinara to congratulate her, their words filled with newfound respect. Eli remained by her side throughout, his presence a constant reminder of the partnership that had made it all possible. That night, as the stars of Lumara glittered above them, Tinara and Eli stood on the balcony overlooking the city. The air was cool, the weight of their victory settling over them like a warm embrace. Do you think they'll really change? Tinara asked, her voice quiet. Not overnight, Eli admitted, but this is a start, and with you leading the way, I think the galaxy's got a fighting chance. She smiled, leaning against him. Thank you, Eli, for everything. He looked down at her, his expression soft. I should be the one thanking you. You've given me a reason to believe in something bigger than myself. As they stood together, their bond unshakable, the galaxy began to move toward a brighter future, one where love, courage, and unity proved stronger than prejudice or fear. Together, Tinara and Eli had not only defied the odds, they had reshaped the stars themselves.